morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining, and for those who are still joining us, thank you for your patience. We will be starting momentarily, but I just wanted to welcome you to the third session. Our moderators for today will be Dolphin, who will be taking over, and Julie, and they will briefly introduce themselves, the program, the speakers, and we hope that you enjoy this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for making time yet again. So this is the third session of our Road to COP26 webinar series. So the Road to COP26 webinar series is part of the GYCAF Readiness Program, and the program is basically looking to how do I say, capacity build young people ahead of the 26 conference parties that is set to take place in the next coming month. So this session is looking to basically unpack issues of what carbon markets and Article 6 and all those CDM and all those very technical jargons, what are they, so that we can be able to have a better understanding, even especially for those who intend to follow online, are going to COPs or anything. Maybe they should have a bit of a basic knowledge on what the issues around markets and carbon pricing and CDM are. So today, I don't know if my co-host is already here with us. So today we will have a very interesting panelist. I don't know if they're here. I can see Ruben is already here. Ruben, welcome to this session. We look forward to wonderful presentation. Sunny is already here. And I think we have a very interesting team of young people. So I think without wasting any more time, because I think we should just set this ball rolling, I'd like to basically I'd like to introduce my colleague Julie, if she's in the meeting, if she can have the floor and introduce herself and tell her basically to take it over from here. So Julie, is Julie here? Okay, so I think Julie is having a bit of technical issues from my end, but that will not differ. Basically, it will not stop us. So I think I will just jump straight into this. So I'll start with you, Ruben. So Ruben, could you kindly highlight to us what you do? Because in light of Article 6 and UNFCCC, how does your work relate to markets and carbon credits and CDM and all that? So highlight to us what you do in light of today's topic. So Ruben, I think I'll give the floor to you today. We can't hear you, Ruben. I don't know if you're. Yes. Now we can hear you. Now we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, I was also fiddling with my headphones. Well, Dolphin, thank you very much for the opportunity to be a speaker today in the session, and thank you very much for inviting. As you said previously, I work for a company called eCompensate. I am a director and founder of eCompensate, which was founded with the idea of enhance climate actions to private players and individuals in the fight against climate change. So basically what we do is we offer companies and individuals with the possibility to calculate the carbon footprint, which is the first step in order to minimize the impact. And then we offer a range of carbon offsets coming from, or carbon credits coming from carbon projects all around the world for these people to compensate those carbon emissions or to these businesses. In terms of our relation with Article 6, we are not very much in touch with nation states, although nowadays UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement is increasingly including a ground force from private actors and NGOs. It's something that we, at the moment, we are not very much involved with. But in the future, we would like obviously to obviously support the credits coming from the SDM. We all know that the CDM probably is going to end its life, and those credits are not going to be passing to the next carbon market under the Paris Agreement. So obviously we will support the new scheme and those credits, and we will try to give to promote those carbon offsets, giving support to developers by bringing them demand, and also support of buyers by giving them bespoke carbon solutions with they can mitigate and reach the targets that they will set themselves. So that's pretty much what we do at Compensate. If you have any other questions, yes, please let me know.
Thank you for that. It's good for our audience. We have a lot of questions for you, because to have a chance to basically also introduce to them, introduce where they come from. And it's really interesting what you've explained, how basically your organization is working in line with the CDM and the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement alignment. So I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Sunny to basically introduce herself and basically tell the audience what she does in line with carbon markets and CDM, and of course the Article 6 basically of the Paris Agreement. So Ms. Sunny, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. So I'm a policy analyst for North American cap and trade markets. I've been following the markets very closely for the past 4 years now. So what I do is I look at the changing policies. I look at states that may look to join the program, and tell our clients and write stories, do research on how the market is expanding. So, I mean, right now we have 2 programs. We have California that's linked with Quebec, and then we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is the Northeast program, and has been expanding by 1 state per year, with multiple other states interested in it. So that's pretty much what I do. If you want to explain anything about the history or the global markets, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Sunny, for that brief and yet quite elaborate presentation. I'd like to invite our third speaker. We have 2 more speakers on the road. Mr. Divaldo, if he could introduce himself and what he does in line with the topic of the day, which is carbon markets and Article 6, basically. Divaldo, if you're on the line, kindly. Divaldo, I don't know if Divaldo is around to introduce himself a bit. I can't seem to spot Divaldo. Okay, so I think Divaldo is still having a bit of technical issues, but I think he will join. I think when he gets around, we can basically pick it up from there. So I think we can jump on to give the floor, unless Maria, is Divaldo here, or our 4th speaker?
No. Yeah, I think we could. Dolphin, we're having a bit of feedback from the audio on your side, but we could ask Sachin to introduce himself as well, because he's around. Sachin, the floor is yours, please. Sachin from Enking, please could you kindly introduce yourself? If you're muted, kindly unmute yourself. All right, I think he might also be having a little bit of technical difficulties. Apologies for that. But so I will just basically introduce what he does. So he's a climate change advisory, and he's with Enking International based in India. And he's an engineer by profession, and has worked with the India's second largest IT provider, Infosystems Limited. At present, he's working with Enking International as a senior manager, carbon offset portfolio management, managing a team of 9 managers and leading business development activities for South Asia, West Asian and African countries with a focus on development and procurement. Yes, are you there, Sanching?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
Sachin, from anything. Yeah, thank you. So sorry for the technical issues. I think my name is Sachin Patra, and I work with EKI Energy Services Limited, otherwise also called as Enking International. In India, it is the largest carbon offset management company, and it also has offices across the world in more than 18 countries. We also have presence in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. So me and my team have been working on carbon offset origination from East Africa and South Asian countries, and I specifically focus on happy to answer all the questions that the audience has. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sachin, for that introduction. So now that we know who the speakers are, you can see that we have a very nice array of speakers who will be speaking about carbon markets, offsets, and how young people can be engaged. We would like to dive into the first set of questions. And since I can't see Divaldo around, we're going to have to jump to Sunny, if you don't mind. One of the questions that we would like to ask from you is, do you think the private sector is doing enough to contribute to carbon offsets? And do you believe, and do you believe that carbon credits or certified emissions reductions certificates provide a proper incentive for governments and companies to decarbonize? So maybe we could start with those first 2 questions, and then we shall come back to Sachin to probably dissect for us what are carbon markets and why are they important in Article 6.
Okay, so as far as the private sector, the first part of that question, are they doing enough? They have been ramping up ambition, and there has been, the voluntary offset market has been skyrocketing, which is good, right? But could they do more? There's always more that can be done. And one thing that I think you have to look at is not only the targets that they set, but are they following through with it? I will say that as far as like corporations right now, I've never seen so much support for carbon markets and offsets. We have here in the US, we have, you know, your major fuel companies advocating for carbon markets and carbon reduction. You have business coalitions. even like the CFTC, which is a governmental agency, is now, as of like last week, supporting carbon markets. So there is a lot of support, and I think that's a great thing. But I think that they also need to make sure to be holding themselves accountable, that they're following through on that. And the second part of your question, I think, was about offsets and whether they're a good mechanism to, help meet the carbon reductions. Yes, of course, we want to reduce emissions, right? We want to have a carbon-free power sector, but that's going to be a bit of a timely process. And in the meantime, and in addition, even when that does happen, we're going to have natural-based solutions like offsets to counterbalance. So an offset being that, it's one offset allowance, they all they equate to 1 ton of carbon being emitted. So when a company purchases an offset, then they're counterbalancing that by 1 ton for what they purchase. So I think they're necessary.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think now that you've explained that, it's also probably important for our audience. Some of our audience might not know what carbon offsetting is. So we would like to invite Sachin, and maybe Dolphin, you could be the one to do the honors of asking the question to Sachin, please.
Thank you, Maria, for that. It's actually quite interesting, basing from the work that Sachin has highlighted, because I'm informed that I think Engen was responsible for the CDM market. I think the CDM engagement in Kenya, which is something very quite interesting. I'd want to also know about that. So I just want to ask Sachin, what are carbon markets, and why are they important, and how do they link to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement? Because I think for most of our audience, we are used to the UNFCCC language of Article 6, and no one actually makes us really understand the linkages to carbon markets and carbon pricing and carbon offset. So if Sachin, you would mind, could you kindly explain to us what carbon markets are and how basically they link to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement? So Sachin, the floor is yours.
Yes, sure, Dolphin. Thank you for the question. May I present my screen? Is it possible to present something on the screen and explain my answers?
Yes. That is very much welcome. Yes.
Yeah, if you could enable the presentation option.
Yes. Just a minute. Are you able to present?
No, not yet. I can see that option share screen, but it is not enabled for me.
Okay, 1 minute. Should be able to be.
Sachin, you should be able to share your screen now. Please try.
So here, who can share? Only host is allowed to share in sharing options. So can I make it all participants? Hello? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead and try to share your screen while we fix that issue.
Yeah. No, I'm still not able to do that. So, okay, let me answer this question in a manner. between the buyers and sellers. So which is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2. So and the market started from Kyoto Protocol, where it was acknowledged that developed countries are responsible for the global warming that we are seeing, and they were given certain targets to meet in terms of purchase of carbon offsets from developing countries. So in this way, developing countries could also get a channel of finance or investment to grow their economy, to invest in new and upcoming green or less emission technologies. And so that's how the market, the source and sink of carbon offset was established by protocol, which is reducing emission compared to a baseline. Baseline is the scenario before the project implementation. Let's say I have a solar power plant right now. I am going to put up a solar power plant. So before I have put up a solar power plant, what was the scenario in that area? So the consumers in that area would be receiving power from the grid. Now the grid power has a certain emission factor associated with that. That is tons of emission for every megawatt hour of energy consumed from the grid. Now because of my solar power plant, that emission factor is being reduced. So that calculation happens, and on the basis of that calculation, the target of emission reduction. They have said they might have said voluntarily, or they might have set those targets because of some complaints. But as on date, 90, the majority of the voluntary carbon market is about voluntary. The compliance market is more about carbon pricing instruments like carbon tax or emission trading systems like the one you might have been hearing, EU ETS, carbon tax. There are many carbon taxes around the world. So in voluntary carbon market, companies come up voluntarily in their own interest. They set up their targets like being carbon neutral, or being energy efficiency measures, or changing the technologies or anything, because some form of energy or anyway going to use, and that will cause some emission. So that residual emission, that is called residual emission, that has to be neutralized by purchase of these offsets. So purchasing, so in this market, Article 6, why it is important is it will help in the overall reduction of cost of reducing emission, or controlling that, controlling the temperature rise. The intended temperature, the intended goal of is the we do country, every individual, every company, every entity to pace up their activities, to increase, to accelerate their activities, to invest more into green emission reduction. Now there is certain cost to everything. Whatever we do to reduce emission, there is certain cost. Now let's say USA is trying to
Sachin, I think we're having problems with your audio. We can't quite hear you. It keeps breaking in and out. I'm not sure if it's a problem on that end or on our end, but we would like to know if you could please speak up a little bit so we can hear you. Are you there? All right, if he's not, he's probably fixing the issue, but I would like to invite Ruben to supplement on this question. I think he would also like to shed some more light on the carbon markets agenda, and maybe we can also learn a thing or two from him as Sachin is fixing the technicalities on his end. Ruben, please.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, so I have another presentation as well on the basics of carbon markets, so what they are, a bit of the history of the UN carbon markets from Kyoto to Paris. So if you want, I can show that. We give a bit of background to the audience. So I will try to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see what I am showing. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Well, so this is a presentation I prepared, which is, as I said, related to carbon markets, what they are, the types, and then a bit of the history. So I'm going to skip this part because I already spoke about the compensate and what we do. Basically, carbon market players. So again, very quickly, we provide carbon footprinting, then carbon offsetting with carbon credits, and also renewable energy certificates to individuals and corporates. The presentation, very quickly, has two parts. First, what are carbon markets? And the second part, the history of UN carbon markets. So what are carbon markets? As the word says, it's a market, but it is more like a trading system through which countries and organizations may buy or sell carbon credits or offsets. They do this for different reasons. It could be either because they have national targets, like in the case of the EU ETS, or it can be as a voluntary action to mitigate for a climate impact or a climate change impact. So as we said before, 1 carbon credit equals to 1 ton of CO2 avoid or remove. And we will see later the differentiation between avoidance and removals. So why carbon markets are a good tool or a good mechanism to solve climate change? Well, the economic logic behind is basically that it reduces emissions at the lowest cost or the easiest way possible. Because we only have 1 atmosphere, it doesn't really matter where those emissions occur or happened. So in that sense, then it will make more sense to do those emissions where are the easiest, right? So then by putting out a market, we achieve those carbon reductions at the cheapest level. Of course, as every market, supply and demand must be balanced. Otherwise, it doesn't work, or it can have imbalances that can create the whole market to not give or have the impact it has. For example, Again, the EU ETS market has been for many years, not anymore, but it has been for many years depressed because the supply was too high compared with the demand. So that created a very low carbon market price that didn't incentivize reductions from companies, because for them paying for the credits was not very harmful. It was very cheap compared with other costs, and they were not taking seriously their emissions. There are two different major types of carbon markets. The one called cap and trade scheme, which is like the one I just mentioned, the EU ETS, the European Emissions Trading Scheme. So in this system, participants trade emissions allowances, right? So the regulator, in this case, will be the European Union, says, okay, well, we have all these limits, we have this cap, so this is the maximum emissions that we can have in a given year. So we are going to split those into allowances, and we are going to give them to the markets either by free allocation or by auctioning. And then companies need to buy those credits in order to compensate for their emissions within that year. So in this system, participants cannot go over, as I said, of the allowances distributed, which it allows for, instead of going to a zero-sum system, it can go beyond and really reduce emissions, because the regulator will put those limits, right? They're more difficult to implement, but at the same time, it gives more control over the emissions to the regulator of the government that set up the system. The second one is baseline and credit mechanism, also so-called offsetting schemes. In this system, participants trade offsets, which represent an additional carbon reduction or removal. The difference with the allowance from the cap and trade system is that the offsets come from projects that happened in the past. So those reductions or removals already happened. Offsetting mechanisms as well, they can only lead to a zero-sum game, because one credit reduced or removed will be offset by another emission happened somewhere else in the world, unless companies buy more offset than emission they have. In that case, it could have that effect of going beyond the zero-sum game. In fact, Paris Agreement is trying to do something similar that we will touch upon later. So these markets are easier to implement in a way, but at the same time, the organizations or regulators setting them up have more difficulties limiting or imposing limits on those targets. So very quickly, UN carbon markets started in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro summit. In this summit, UN participant countries got together to talk about issues after the Soviet era, and more in particular about sustainability, which it was already understood that it was too big for any country to be sorted. So that's why they needed this cooperation between nations. After this, the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the body that regulates efforts against climate change, is set up. And then after that, it creates the Conference of the Parties. So basically, all the UN parties will be meeting once a year in a place to talk about the state of the environment, climate change, and to come up with ways to solve the problem. So the first COP happened in Berlin in 1995. And from that moment, the convention and protocol model was put on the table, So they said, okay, well, we need a protocol. We need all the parties signing a joint agreement on what to do or the objectives to solve climate change. And in this way, the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 came about as the first effort, legally, well, I want to say legally binding, is not binding, but first legal effort among countries to solve this problem. I have to say that in the beginning it wasn't very ambitious. So, for example, the reductions that were agreed in the first part of the Kyoto Protocol were just 5% average of emission reductions below 1990 levels. Of course, some countries give more than others, but the average total was 5%. The second period saw countries like the European Union countries stepping up their ambition and committing to 20% reduction levels below 1990, but still the rest of the world were dragging their feet, especially big players like US and China, which really made a chip into everyone's hopes. When you don't have the main emitters and players involved, that says a lot from a joint commitment like this one. And as a part of the Kyoto Protocol, one of the central parts was the CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, which was the first trading system in the world to combat climate change. And Enkim was talking before, they are one of the main developers within the CDM, one of the main developers of CERs, which is the unit of this system called Certified Emission Reductions. As I said before, the Kyoto Protocol was undermined by lack of support from big polluters. It wasn't binding only on paper. So if someone wasn't doing what they pledged, then no one was going behind them or putting fines or giving any kind of penalty for that. And then the trading under the CDM was also undermined by what is called hot air trading. So, for example, there was something called assigned amount units that they were given to all the ex-Soviet countries for them to be on board and sign the Kyoto Protocol. So all these AAUs came from projects with questionable kind of robustness, from projects that they were not going to be additional, that they were going to happen anyway, and they were creating or flooding the market with units and reductions that they were not very legit or very real. So that also kind of threw a bit of shade on the CDM functioning and credibility. But of course, from everything, all the negatives, there are positives, and Paris took everything that happened in Kyoto, learned from it, and is trying still to fix these problems, and that's where the Article 6 kind of debate comes from, right? Article 6 is the part of the Paris Agreement that regulates carbon markets functioning to solve climate change, and that's why. And up to today is the only part that it hasn't been agreed from the whole agreement. But from Kyoto to Paris, there's a huge shift in let's say, approach. So, for example, there's a global agreement to limit warming to 2 degrees and try to make efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In this case, all countries must adopt climate targets. In Kyoto was just the rich countries, which were the only ones, with obligations. Here is every country must adopt their national determined contribution, or NDCs. Instead of just putting them, these are periodically reviewed to make sure they are being implemented. And then every 5 years, these NDCs needs to be rated, and they need to be at least as strong as the previous one. So the system of the negotiations manage to make this schedule in order to always increase that level of ambition. Then coming back to Article 6, Article 6 includes 2 new markets within its scope, which are set to replace the Kyoto Protocol market. So basically, Article 6 is split in 2 within carbon markets. Then you have other articles within the Article 6 that regulates or rules other parts. But within carbon market is basically Article 6.2, which allows countries to sell any extra emissions reductions. They are called ITMOs, which stand for International Transfer Mitigation Outcomes. So this article basically says, well, a country can create carbon units, but let's say that they create more than they need to cover the indices, they can sell those, and other countries in the same way can buy them. Which again, you know, if some countries have not very ambitious reduction targets or projects that can create that not very credible units coming to the market. So again, the risk of trading of hot air is there. So that's why it's one of the sticking points of the negotiations. Then the Article 6.4. This is basically the replacement of CDM. It's basically the same, but in this case, projects are not limited just to developing countries. Also, any other country can develop projects. The Article 6.4 is also called SDM, Sustainable Development Mechanism. But even though, you know, sounds easy to implement, there are a lot of challenges, and that's the reason why the Article 6 is not yet agreed, and that's why it's pretty much one of the most important topics in the coming COP26 in Glasgow, because it's facing challenges to do with too many credits available. So there are around 4 billion estimated CERs coming from the CDM, from the Kyoto Protocol, that has the risk of coming into the SDM if they are allowed. Well, the basic question is, well, should they be allowed at all, these units that were created in the past? My point is not really, because they will flood the market. It's much more supply than the demand at the moment, and I don't think it would be something beneficial for the SDM. Then you have as well the risk of double counting. This that we were talking about, Article 6.2. Well, all those ITMOs that a country can either include in their own NDCs or sell, they could be double counted, right? So the country that produce them could say, well, they are in my carbon inventory because I produce them, but then the country that buys them obviously is going to put them also and account for them in their inventory. So we need what is called corresponding adjustments to really put in place mechanisms that monitor this trading between nations and make sure that double counting doesn't happen. But again, it's not easy to implement at a global scale. Then you have to challenges as well to avoid perverse incentives. So this is very similar to hot air trading. So countries will prefer maybe to reduce ambition in order to sell more credits and get more revenues. So this is also a very present challenge at the moment in Article 6. And then also the delivery of overall mitigation in global emissions. And this has to do with the zero-sum game nature of carbon offsetting systems. These systems, unless you buy more offset than you need, they are only going to give you that zero sum, right? So Article 6 mentions, well, should we maybe go beyond this and in some way, every time a country buys, let's say, 10 carbon offsets for their NDCs, 5 are automatically cancelled. In that way, we incentivize that going over the those mitigation of global emissions. So these are very basically, we will be talking hours about negotiations and articles in Paris, but very basic. This is in a nutshell the carbon markets, its history and current role of play or role play. But obviously, it's something that hopefully will be discussed in the COP26 and probably solved, or at least they will set the basis to go beyond these points, and we can finally finalize the Paris Agreement and start those mitigation and reduction efforts that we are all waiting for. So I think I'm going a bit over my limit, but I hope it was clear. I hope it answers some of the questions from the session. And yeah, you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruben, for that insightful presentation. I think we've learned a thing or two. We've learned quite a lot on carbon markets and carbon trading, and of course, the contentions Article 6.2 and 6.4. So in light of that, that's a lot of information. So I'll give our audience a bit time to digest all that knowledge that you just downloaded onto us. I'd basically like to ask Sachin. Sachin, in your experience, how does, of course, from Ruben's presentation and from the ongoing discussions from when we start, how does this translate into young people in the context of community and local context? And what is the financial and technical consideration for the realization of a successful carbon trading scheme? Because I think Ruben has tried to basically elaborate on the carbon trading system that exists. So I know this is a bit of a heavy question, so I want to give you more time to basically ponder over that particular question. And I'd like to jump straight over to Sunny and ask Sunny, as Sachin prepares to give us a very heavy answer on that. Sunny, what are the major milestones that your organization has accomplished in the race to zero? Everyone is moving, towards the race to zero. Everyone's agenda is geared towards the race to net zero. So from your experience, what are the milestones that your organization has accomplished in the race to net zero? So Sunny, I'll give you the floor. Then I will come back to Sachin to basically unpack and continue driving this discussion some more. So Sunny, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Ruben, for the presentation. That was carbon markets. So as far as organizations, setting targets and sticking with them, participating in the voluntary programs when it's not a compliance program. The particular company that I work for has environmental programs, diversity and inclusivity, programs to reach out to younger people in multiple different areas. So the way my particular company has done that is through word of mouth, acting on environmental issues. They have different environmental programs. Some of them are more related to, let's say, like recycling and plastics and stuff like that. But I think that every organization has the opportunity, to make steps to reduce their emissions, and the voluntary carbon market is the way to do it right now. If you're not part of the industry or the power sector, which may go under compliance, then voluntary is the way to go. We can offset flights for people that travel back and forth, and the gas that count the commuting of who drives how much and how much fuel are they using, and supporting employees in these initiatives.
Thank you, Sunny, for that. And yeah, I think that's a very key point that you've highlighted, the voluntary basically, and how to support employees, which basically to me feels like how to support the local community basically in my times. So thank you very much for that very insightful answer. I'd want to jump back to Sachin, and I can ask that question again, basically in light of course, what Sunny has said, voluntary carbon trading, I think should be like that. And of course, with ongoing discussion, how does all this translate into young people in the context of community and local context? And what is the financial and technical consideration for the realization of successful carbon trading scheme? So Sachin, I want to give the floor over to you. You're welcome.
Thanks, Dolphin. First of all, I'm not sure whether I was able to complete my answer in the last question, because I was going on speaking, and by the time I finished, I realized that I was not hearing any response from the system, and then I had to rejoin it. So my apologies if my connection was not good, and I left midway. So here, why it is important for the youth, and how youth can leverage the carbon market or voluntary carbon market. All it is generation. So that's why it is important. And the next thing is, they are also in a better state to tackle this challenge, because they are well versed with today's technologies, the upcoming technologies that can help you reduce emission, which the older generation might not be in a state of mind to accept and implement. So in that sense, they are well to deal with in everybody's day-to-day life. It's not only in the hands of the government, and in the hands of international bodies like UNFCCC or COP, or the Paris Agreement negotiators uh, to have an answer to this. But it is everybody's responsibility to deal with these questions, and bring out the answers in their day-to-day life. How carbon offsets can help, obviously, is from the previous discussions that we have been having. It is clear that the carbon markets provide a way through which you can earn additional revenue for the emission that you have reduced. You can monetize that emission in a way, in a simple manner, if I can state. Now, the most important thing to to be able to monetize your carbon offset is to be able to register your project under any of the accepted international standards, like for that, first is you need to design a project, or you need to have such a project which is eligible under the conditions, or on the terms and conditions laid down by these standards. So like in case of CDM, let's say for example, if I take send a prior consideration for to every country has their own CDM months or 180 days of first purchase order release. So let's say you're going to build a solar power plant, so you to act the start date of the project, or in simple language, you can say that you are financially committed towards that project, because you have invested something to purchase something for that project. Now, within lines in other standards that you have to follow. So these things, this is the first thing you have to keep in mind, that you should not cross this deadline of registration. And then the most important step is your project should be
Sachin, I think we've lost you again. We can't hear you. I think he's having audio difficulties again. I really apologize because I know he was speaking about something really important. Hopefully we can give him a chance to address this issue again. But as we are waiting for him to figure out what's happening with the audio, we would like to welcome Divaldo, who has finally been able to join us to the call. And perhaps, Divaldo, you could come in right off the bat and answer one of the questions for us, which is, how do carbon markets and carbon offsetting provide funding for renewable projects? And as you do that, we would kindly ask you to introduce yourself.
Hello, Maria. Yeah. I hope.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, you can hear me. Oh, amazing. Good. Very nice. I'm Divaldo Rezende. I'm a PhD in climate change and biology. And I have been working 35 years in sustainability, local community development, and carbon markets, with most of my projects are in the Brazilian Amazon. And our organization there is one of the very strong NGOs on the field at the moment. It's called Ecologica Institute, and developed something quite interesting in terms of new methodologies. And one of the methodologies called social carbon. How you can bring social benefits for the stakeholders and the participants in a carbon sequestration project or a carbon reduction project. And also we built there a research center that is called Canguçu. This research center receives students in master and PhDs from around the world for activities associated with climate change, sustainable development, and local community enforcement. I'm Brazilian, by the way.
Thank you. So could you, okay, Dolphin, go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. So we're very excited to have Divaldo, given his vast experience. There's a question I think Maria had basically wanted to ask you. So basically, Divaldo, I know you have you're a wealth of knowledge. How do carbon markets and carbon offsetting provide funding for renewable projects? So Divaldo, the floor is yours, because we haven't gotten a chance to pick your brain. So Divaldo, if you can come back again.
Yes, no problem at all. There is, for example, I don't know if you are aware, but at the moment, renewable energy projects not allowed under the standard VERA, the biggest standard in terms of the voluntary carbon. The renewable energy projects, they are allowed under the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, under UNFCCC, compliance market. And what is happening at the moment is we are waiting for the COP26 to see what happens in terms of the definitions under the Article 6, the market mechanism, that's going to support the participation of the young people, different stakeholders, local community in activities associated to the project. And also it's important because the COP26, we're going to have the final definition if they come in an agreement about the rules, how to prepare a sustainable development project. And this is quite important to be aware, because most of these projects, they need to have public hearing. They need to hear the necessities of the local communities. They need to understand what is going on in that area of the project. And in this case, I think the young people, the youth could have very strong participation on that, in understanding the local benefits for those emission carbon projects. I think as a first start, the other important thing is, normally in all this international process, everybody try to bring the views of different stakeholders, young people, old people, PhDs, scientists, and different kind of people. They want to see what they are thinking about that specific activity or that specific definition. And this is a very important space that we as a man, as a woman, as a member of a society, we need to fulfill that gap, because it's necessary to reinforce and to make strong our participation in terms to make clear what we want in terms of sustainability for that specific region, to make sure that we want environmental education associated to that project. And this is a right that we have in this kind of hearing, in this kind of discussion. Maria?
Yes, so thank you so much for answering that question. And I think at this point, having understood what carbon markets are, the carbon trading system, and the lovely explanation from both Ruben and Sachin, we would like to open up the floor to some questions from the audience before we dive back into more technical questions. So if you have any questions out there, please raise your hand or type in the chat box with an X, and we shall be sure to take your questions. So anyone from the audience, might you have any questions for our speakers?
Maria, just a clarification issue.
Yes.
I am based in Lisbon these days. I think I start in the wrong time to the participation.
Well, yes, but it's okay. You were able to catch up. So yeah, we are grateful that you're here. So is anyone in the audience having any questions they would like to ask to any of our speakers, either Ms. Sunny or Ruben or Divaldo or Sachin? Please raise your hand or type in the chat box if you can.
We can't hear you, Maria. Unmute.
Yes, I think we don't have any questions from the audience right now, so I will ask Dolphin to come on board and lead us through the next session of questions.
Thank you, Maria, for that insightful guidance. So I just want to dive back to Ms. Sunny, in light of course, what Divaldo has highlighted in the role of participation and local benefits of the carbon trading and carbon offsetting. So Sunny, I'd like to ask you, what can young people do to encourage their governments or companies to decarbonize, basically? Because you've actually highlighted what the companies can do to basically support their employees in the race, let me call it, in the race to net zero. So what can young people who might not be employed within, of course, these companies, or basically might not be maybe employed in government, how can they encourage their governments and companies to decarbonize? So Sunny, I'll give you that. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I can think of a few things that come to mind there, and I really liked what Devaldo said about, educating yourself, and whether it's through formal education. I'm completing my master's in global energy and climate policy. Whether it's that way or it's watching the webinars, it's staying involved. But I would say connect with like-minded people. I live in a place that carbon markets are very much opposed, but I reach out and I find people who feel the same way that I do, and organize. And there's meetings all of the time in different states. I may not be able to go to a cap and trade meeting in Texas, but I may be able to join one in Pennsylvania virtually. And you have the opportunity to, speak your mind and talk to your, regulators, the state departments, the legislators, and, let them know this is something that is important to, the next generation, because it is. And so I would just say, believe in yourself, organize, don't give up. I mean, there's always going to be opposition, but stay involved and commit yourself to it if it's something that you feel, a conviction for.
Thank you, Ms. Sunny. And that's a very important thing. Educate yourself, watch webinars, network, look for like-minded individuals. In the spirit of educating yourself, basically, I'd like to ask Ruben a very key question. What is CORSIA? It's CORSI, in the spirit of educating ourselves. And how have you been able to advance CORSIA with your clients in the aviation industry? Are there any ways to encourage sorry, I'm having a bit of technical. Are there any shortcomings to this scheme? So CORSIA is, I think it's one of the technical terms within the carbon markets discussion. So I'd like Ruben to unpack for us, because he has quite also a bit array of information that he has been sharing with us. So Ruben, I'll give you the floor to explain to young people what is CORSIA. Yes, Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dolphin. CORSIA is a carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation. So that's the acronym it stands for. And it's the attempt of UN or ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, to regulate emissions from international aviation. So as you all know, aviation emissions are really harmful. And are really growing exponentially because flying is cheaper and everyone likes to go to nice and sunny places. So therefore, people fly more and there are more emissions that are also especially harmful because they happen at high altitude. So CO2 trapped at that altitude of the atmosphere, it has much more greenhouse effect than carbon that might be at lower altitudes. The first attempt to regulate emissions from aviation, for international aviation, came from the European Union, in fact, from the European EU ETS back in 2012. But of course, countries jumped very quickly into that, saying, well, you are the European Emission Trading Scheme, your jurisdiction is European Union, you cannot tax me, let's say, for a flight that comes from New York, right? All the way to London, for example. So very quickly, European Union had to change the scope of how they were accounting for emissions from aviation, and they decided to only include the emissions from flights that come, that depart and land within the European airspace. But obviously, this happened with one kind of conditional, and it was okay. Well, we do this, but UN and ICAO, you have to develop something to deal with international emissions from international aviation, which are bigger, obviously, than European emissions. So in 2016, after a few years of negotiations in Montreal, they signed the CORSIA regulation. So basically, all the countries within ICAO are together saying, well, we need to do something about this, and the way to do it is to offset all the emissions from a baseline point, which in this case is the average emissions of 2019 and 2020. So everything above that baseline has to be offsetted by the purchase of carbon offsets. So it compensates. Our company was with aviation players, with airlines, to understand CORSIA, to understand which are the ways for them to comply with the system, which are the deadlines, which are the ways they have to do it. So yeah, that's our major role within CORSIA, understanding very well the system and then transfer that knowledge to companies for them to comply in an easy and cost-effective way. And coming back to the question of how this system can have user flaws or weak points. Well, obviously that's related to the carbon units with which you can comply with. At the moment, there are 8 carbon standards approved for CORSIA. Among them, you have BCS, you have American Carbon Registry, you have Gold Standard, you have, if I am not wrong, CDM as well. So the system has potential to deliver not just carbon reduction or removals, but also what Divaldo was saying about those extra co-benefit, extra sustainable development goals that at this point in time, any carbon credit must deliver. So it's up to the companies to decide. Nowadays, I think due to this being a very hot topic, due to a lot of players, either from the private sector, from the NGO sector, from the political sector, there's a lot of information out there. So it's fairly easy to know which are the best way to in this case, comply with CORSIA, and which are the units and which are the carbon projects that deliver those extra benefits. So the system, as it stands, I think is setting an important kind of point in the history of carbon markets. So and it's also this is also being shown in carbon markets or carbon unit exchanges. They are actually creating the offset, the CORSIA offset, which is the compliance, the offset that can comply within CORSIA. They are becoming kind of like the best quality offset out there, you know. So I think it has a lot of potential, but at the same time, it depends the credits that the airlines buy, because still, even though the vintage is kind of recent, it's 2016 plus vintage, the credits you can buy, well, crediting period 2016 plus, sorry, no vintage. Still, there are very a lot of difference between credits. The carbon markets, or the voluntary carbon markets, especially, it's still very heterogeneous, very diverse. And that's good and bad, but of course, in this case, pointing the bad points, I would say that is the risk of CORSIA, to be comply with the minimum and the cheapest and the less maybe impactful projects, and maybe enter into a race to the bottom kind of practice. But apart from that, I think is a system with good prospects in the future, and I think is, as I said, setting a point for other markets, like for example the one from maritime, which is under construction from the IMO, from the International Maritime Organization, from the UN. I hope I answered your question, Dolphin.
Yes, I think you've answered the question. It's a really tough topic, obviously. So thank you for answering that question. I think we shall go to a more like a lesser technical issue, because a lot of us have to digest, and these are things that they speak about at the COP, but young people don't really have a chance to understand it fully because of the limitations of the time spent during the COP. So having you explain it now gives us a little bit more time to digest and understand the shortcomings and how exactly CORSIA plays into the carbon markets and Article 6 agenda. So without further ado, we would also like to ask a question to Sachin, if you're still around. We'd like to ask you what the current status of the performance and impact of the clean development mechanism in light of countries and organizations that you have worked with. How has it been performing? Are there any shortcomings? I know that Ruben explained some of the disadvantages of the pluses and the negatives, but from your practical experience, what have you seen on the ground? So the floor is yours. Sachin, please take the floor. I'm not sure if you're speaking. I can see that your mic is unmuted, but we can't really hear you. I think he's having some problems. All right, so we shall bring in Divaldo while he tries to solve the issues on his side. And Divaldo, we'd like to ask you about what you mentioned earlier with your institute. I can't really pronounce the name. I think it's Instituto Ecologica, and the methodology that you started under this, which is social carbon. And if you could explain to us how you have been able to advance the methodology of social carbon within the work that you do, and how does this relate to the new and improved system under the Sustainable Development Mechanism of the Paris Agreement?
Okay. Social carbon was created to answer the following questions. My carbon sequestration projects making any difference in the life of the local stakeholders? The second question is, the local development is increasing with the activities that I'm investing on the field during the project implementation. And this was quite interesting because from that point of view, we create the methodology of social carbon that was created through the sustainable livelihood approach that is quite famous in UK, was UK discovery and development that has been used for a long time to support projects around the world in terms of sustainability. And nowadays, after 20 years of social carbon have been used as a core benefit standard associated with VCS. There is more than 100 projects around the world. Most of the projects are Brazil, Colombia, Turkey, Indonesia, and China, with several project developers using social carbon as a core benefit to evaluation. What this means is that social carbon evaluates the different aspects of a project in terms of biodiversity, natural capital, social capital, and others. And nowadays, we are really thinking to launch social carbon as a complete standard with carbon and the co-benefit for the voluntary market. But this is something that we're still evaluating. If you want to know more about social carbon, you can visit our website. It's www.socialcarbon.org. Maria, any other complementation or clarification that is required?
No, I think that you've answered that question, and I want to bring in Dolphin because I know she might have a question or two for you and for Sachin as well. So Dolphin, please, the floor is yours as well.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much, Valdo. I think it's quite a lot that you've given us, and we need a bit more time to process. I've been made aware that Sachin is back and he is ready to answer his question. So if I could just bring him back on board and just ask him, Sachin, let me re-ask the question again. What is the current status of the performance and impact of the CD? Because you've highlighted that your organization is based or has worked with a number of countries, and I think it's also a number of countries in different continents, I want to assume. And in addition to that, I'm going to throw at you two questions because we really need to harness all that knowledge from you. Will the adoption of the SDM advancement with the CDM? So Sachin, I want to give you the floor to answer these two technical questions. So the floor is yours, Sachin.
Thank you, Dolphin. In terms of how CDM has been beneficial for various companies across the world. So at the time when it started in 2005, 2008, and even in 2010 and 12, many of the projects were planned in such a manner that the CDM offset revenue was one of the primary revenues for those projects and companies. But as the market failed due to less demand or less pricing signals to the demand side of the market, so in this approach to consider CDM credits as one of the primary revenues. So right now, when the market is starting to rise again, even we are suggesting to all the clients to look at this revenue as an additional incentive, not as a revenue for their projects or for their organization. So this would be a statement of caution from me to all to all the youth, to all or who are looking forward to monetize and leverage this carbon market. Do not consider these carbon market revenues as a primary revenue for your project. So there are certain kind of projects, like nature-based solution, or invest to offtake the carbon credit. So they have the liquidity. For them, the rate of emission reduction or the cost for each ton of emission reduction in their internal process is higher. That's why they're ready to invest $5, $7, $10 per organization. but that might not be same for all kind of companies. So we have to keep that in mind while revenue, and how SDM replaces CDM, rules and regulations that are going to come here. Uh, One thing, so there are two things, those are mainly contentious in SDM market. One is how the baseline is set in different methods that we're using right now. So if the baseline is updated, they are made more stringent that projects with creating high, it be a little loss for some of the projects or some of the organizations in developing countries, because they might not qualify for the carbon offset.
Sachin, we lost you a bit. I don't know if it's just me. We lost you a bit. Are you still there? Sachin, are you still there? We've lost you a bit and we cannot able to hear, but yes. I think Sachin is having a bit of technical issue, which is understandable with, of course, today's technology. Sachin, are you able to hear us? Could you unmute yourself?
Perhaps we can move on to the next question. It's really unfortunate that he's having difficulties, because he was really, explaining something very important. So hopefully he can come back again and address that question. But in the meantime, we would like to bring back Ruben into the discussion and ask you something that is within your area of expertise as well, which is, what achievements have you seen with the EU emissions trading scheme, and how can the SDM encourage sustainable reporting and accountability? Ruben, if you're around, please kindly address that question for us.
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to put the camera and unmute myself. Thank you for the question. As we saw in the presentation, the EU ETS and the SDM are different kind of carbon markets. One is cap and trade, and the other one is a offsetting mechanism. So that's it's central to how it's calibrated and the difference or how potential flaws can be addressed. But from my experience of the EU ETS, the main, let's say, important point, or the main factor by which now has become one of the let's say most effective carbon markets in the world is the fact that has been able to balance supply and demand. So by a certain number of mechanisms, and of course trial and error, and that's how we have been adjusting these carbon markets, because at the time of the EU ETS was brought into place, there was nothing else to base it with. So it went through a few phases. Obviously, the first one is a pilot phase in which the targets are not very stringent. Companies don't have to spend a lot of time and money into complying by little, including more sectors and more and ramping up that ambition and the amount of carbon credits they have to buy to comply. But as I said, the main factor is to have a balanced supply and demand in the market. In a cap and trade system, that's much more easy to do because you have a limit. You have the cap, which is the number of allowances in circulation. In an offsetting regime that as the SDM, that's more difficult to achieve because you don't have a direct control on the supply. You could put it, I guess, but it's more difficult to apply because if the SDM brings the lessons from the CDM, in theory, if a project is certified and validated by the standard and has the certification to start issuing, there is no limit to how many carbon projects can be issuing in a given point in time. It's true as well that the demand at the moment is quite high, and it will be even higher once national states need to start also fulfilling their NDCs. But of course, that's one of the things I will be really encouraged to the SDM to do, to try and control that supply and demand. Then, of course, something that doesn't happen in the EU ETS is double counting, because the EU ETS doesn't have that problem, because it's a closed system and there are not rooms for such a thing. Then additionality as well. Again, the EU ETS doesn't have that problem, but the SDM may have that problem if it's not careful, as it happened with the CDM. It really has to have robust methodologies, and it really has to decide well the projects that are additional. And when I mean additional, I mean a project that it couldn't happen without the funding of coming from carbon credits sales and revenues. As Divaldo said before, for example, under VERA or BCS, renewable energy projects are no longer accepted because they are not additional, right? Now renewable energy has reached a point in which it can compete in the merit order of within the energy mix. It doesn't need subsidies, it doesn't need help to be able to be more profitable than coal, than gas generation. So yeah, coming back to the beginning, I would say controlling that supply and making sure that that supply is real, comes from real reduction or removals, I think is one of the main challenges for the SDM going forward.
Thank you, Ruben, for that very insightful material that you've actually given unto us. I think I'd go back, quickly jump back to Divaldo, because we really haven't exhausted you like we anticipated. So Divaldo, could you share some practical examples of successful carbon offset projects that have been carried out by your organization? What recommendations would you propose in improving carbon trading and offsetting? And what advice would you give young people looking to offset their emissions? So Divaldo, we'd love to have you back on the floor.
Delphine, you asked me a very easy question. Thank you. Of course,
you're welcome.
Easy. It's quite complicated, but I have been involved in several kinds of projects. One project that I want to state is in the voluntary market. It's fuel switch project from the ceramic industry in Brazil. More than 100 projects was complying with this methodology, and they did a great great projects using social carbon as a core benefit standard was VCS plus social carbon standard. The other projects that I'm involved, and I have been involved in the past year, is more focused on the RED projects, reduction emission from avoid deforestation and degradation. Those projects are quite controversial, but these are a quite important instrument to conserve the Amazon, for example, could be. And the main issue on this kind of project is what they call in the markets safeguards. How do you guarantee the status of the local stakeholders in such big projects? How this local community will participate in the definition and the strategy of the project? And this is something quite interesting and is quite well regulated, because through a project by project, you should do public hearing. And in what they call at the moment, they call jurisdictional RED, there is quite a big tranche of money and resources to do jurisdictional RED, not only in the forest of Brazil, but in Africa and Asia. Two initiatives was launched. One of them is called LEAF, and another one was a new standard for reduction emission for avoid deforestation degradation called ART3. Of course, COP26 will be very important to meet those actors, to meet the stakeholders, and to see how the things goes, because in the last 3 years, not 3 years, the last 2 years, we have been doing everything through virtual communication and video, and sometimes it's not the best way, because, you know, we lost a lot of opportunity to know interesting things from our colleague from India, for example, because of the bad connection. And the personal meetings is very important to really feel and to understand what goes on that area and sector. Now, on the second part of the question, I think the youth people has a lot of opportunity to support those strategies in terms of sustainable development. And now they are changing again. Now it's not sustainable development anymore. Could be sustainable development, but should be ESG. That is environment, social, and governance. Everyone is talking now about carbon projects, ESG, activities on the climate change, ESG, associated with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And all these things are like accessories, but they are really important if people cares about, if people really understand about it. And I think one of the main contributions that we can give to the young people is education, training, cooperation, to create a kind of South-South cooperation, you know, North-North cooperation, North-South cooperation, but people need to know the different aspects of life, you know, how to approach an authority is not the same way that you do in Brazil than compare to Congo, for example, or compared to Norway. It's really different. And I think the young need to have this kind of network. You still do, but you do have on the Facebook, on the Instagram, send photos, you know, but I think we really need to think something more special to make the young people feel part of the process. What I feel is that sometimes I don't think they feel part of the process. All these issues, you know, they need to really be a part. They need to feel that they can change things like Greta did, you know. He's changing a lot of things. He's criticizing several policies. She's making several contributions in the sector. I think all small contribution has a big value. If it's a letter for authority, if it's participate in a public hearing, I think all this, the small contribution can be bigger when you do that together, connected, and in a network of young people. Any other issues that I forgot, Delphine?
No, thank you very much for touching on very important issues. And I think you clearly said it, that young people want to feel like they're meaningfully engaged and involved in these processes. And like Sunny highlighted earlier, educating yourself and building on meaningful partnerships and networks is very critical. And so we want to really thank you for that. It's unfortunate that the session is about to end, but we would like to propose to have this session physically at COP26. So we want to extend the opportunity to the speakers who have been today to please be speaking again with us physically at the COP26, so that we really are engaged in a one-on-one discussion. We're really sorry that Sa-Ching left early, but he had technical difficulties, and this is one of the disadvantages of meeting virtually. So I would like to hand over to Dolphin if you'd like to give a few last-minute remarks, or if any of the speakers would like to give a few last-minute remarks on this very technical issue.
Thank you, Maria, for of course this wonderful session. I think it was we anticipated we'd had 3 speakers, but we were blessed to have 4 speakers. Sorry, also having a bit of technical issues. We anticipated we'd have 3 speakers, but we're blessed to have 4. And I think the issue of carbon markets and carbon pricing and Article 6, especially 6.2 and 6.4, and of course, all that needs, it cannot be unpacked within one webinar session. And like Maria has said, we will be looking to have a physical session at COP26 in Madrid, and we're hoping that we will also have quite a bit of the young people audience, so that they feel, like Divaldo has said, they feel that they are also part and parcel of the process and not sort of beneficiaries or an add-on or specifically. So I think for me is to thank all the participants for making it, and also to thank, of course, our speakers who have given us a lot of knowledge and a lot of information to unpack and digest. And I think with that, we could possibly give the floor to the speakers to have a last word. I know we are still having 2 who are left, Divaldo and Ruben. So if they would have any final remarks, any final words before we officially close the session. So I'd give you the floor.
Yeah, so coming back to the points of the session, which is, how to include youth into carbon markets and climate change. I cannot be more agreed with Sunny and Divaldo about education, about informing yourself, for example, what your country is doing in regards with carbon emissions mitigation and reduction. It's very easy. Every government will have a website in which they state their plan. So it's something that anyone can do. And then in cases like, for example, in the Netherlands, the population, well, NGOs from the population are taking the state of Netherlands to court because they are not doing enough for mitigating dangerous climate risk and mitigating the flooding that will come with that, especially in the Netherlands, which is a country, as you know, at a very low ground level. And then as well, we are all consumers, so also educating yourself about how you spend your money, which products you're buying. Are those companies doing enough? Are those companies following sustainable processes and techniques? Are those companies doing enough? That's also a big power we have in our everyday lives, which is our power of as consumers. So yeah, those two things are key. And then, of course, getting involved in reducing your emissions as an individual, offsetting your carbon footprint with high quality offsets. It's another way of obviously putting your little contribution to this complex problem. And yeah, that's something that companies like ourselves we can do, and we offer that. So yeah, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in this interesting seminar, and yeah, hopefully I will see you soon at COP26 in a few weeks.
Yes, thank you very much, Ruben. I don't know if Divaldo would want to give some final remarks.
I just want to apologize myself for the delay in enter to the section. And second, to thank you for all the organizers for my invitation. I know that you have been working very hard to put this session together and all the others. And congratulations for that. I think it's a very important issue and important moment that the youngs could help to make some changes too. And then I think I'm going to meet everybody in Glasgow, but so far I'm not, I cannot pay for the accommodation in Glasgow. It's been so complicated and so expensive. I hope you have tried to find something different. And I think with some friends, I'm going to hire a home car and be there for the COP26 in a car home, you know. And anyway, thank you very much. Congratulations to all. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. It's interesting, the last comment you made. I mean, I know it's really expensive for a lot of people traveling, especially from the global south, and we hope we can also put something as a team for young people out there that really want to come. So, but that's still in the works. So, but we would like to thank you once again and officially end this session. And we will be putting the session on YouTube as well once the full recording is made available. But we hope you join us for the next session this Friday on green bonds. And I think we shall be seeing a few familiar faces there. So enjoy your evening and morning and afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bonds.